Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Real. Relationships. No matter what, there always seems to be people hooking up in movies and TV shows. It's a popular plot point, and there's nothing more awesome than seeing your favourite characters finally getting together. But that's not what today's video is about. Today's video is looking at those characters who are shoved together seemingly for the sake of it, that make me roll my eyes and wish for it to be over. So let's take a look at the worst on-screen couples ever. Christopher Chance and Ilsa Pucci, human target. I'm not going to dwell on this one for too long, as I've already discussed it in my What Went Wrong with Human Target video. But Ilsa Pucci was introduced to the show in season 2 as not only the spoiled, entitled head of the team, but also as a love interest for Chance. The poor guy, who continued to refer to her as Mrs. Pucci, would have been much better suited to Maria or Emma. But no, he was stuck with this bitch. And while we tend to make questionable relationship choices when we're emotionally vulnerable, the show's cancellation prevented a resolution to this irritating pairing. Sarah Seidel and Gil Grissom, CSI. Okay, hear me out on this one. I know people seem to love both Sarah and this relationship, but I think it's dumb and I don't gel with Sarah as a character. I loved Grissom and how understated and detached he was, so having him as one half of the show's couple seemed like a really strange choice. While this relationship didn't come out of nowhere as they had some moments through the show, it seemed out of character that Grissom would be in a relationship with someone he's the boss of, and the 15-year age gap between the two made it rather jarring. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with an age gap, but with Catherine a full 10 years older than Sarah, and in my opinion with more chemistry with Grissom, it felt weird to have Grissom and Sarah together, and Catherine having a slightly odd crush on Warwick, who was 8 years her junior. The whole character dynamic of who liked who seemed a bit muddled, and I'm not surprised that Grissom and Sarah's marriage failed. Maybe Sarah and Greg would have made more sense, although that would have broken my heart because I've had a crush on Greg since CSI first aired when I was 13. He's still damn fine all these years later. Willow Rosenberg and Kennedy, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The fanbase is never going to agree on which was the better relationship, Willow and Oz or Willow and Tara. But what we can agree on is, what the hell was Willow and Kennedy? Yes, Oz left, and yes, Tara died. But do you know what you do with Willow after that? Leave her single! There was no need for Kennedy to enter the equation because after 2 incredible relationships, she was the equivalent of dry toast. There is nothing wrong with Kennedy as a character except for her being slightly annoying, but she was so meh as a partner for Willow, especially as she was supposed to be focusing on her training as a potential. I feel like when there's a gay character in a show, which I am super supportive of by the way, the writers always feel the need to have them in a relationship with someone at all times. Speaking of which, Emily Fields and Paige Mccullough's Pretty Little Liars. Let's face it, the best part about Paige and Pretty Little Liars is the fact that her dad is played by Connor Trinneer. Yay! Other than that, the relationship between Emily and Paige should never have entered the writer's mind because Paige tried to drown Emily! That isn't a relationship, that's a giant red flag! I know Paige was repressed and all, but that doesn't mean you should get a girlfriend out of attempted murder. Call the police! Although, while we're on the subject of Emily Fields and Alison De Laurentiis, Pretty Little Liars. I may be biased because I hate Alison De Laurentiis so much that I may be A, but if some bitch emotionally manipulates you, bullies you, fakes her own death, and causes your life to be a living hell, you do not marry her! It made Emily seem like she had the backbone of a cabbage, and let's face it, after Maya, all of Emily's girlfriends were questionable. But Queen B. Laurentiis was by far the worst. But I'm not done with this show yet. Spencer Hastings and Caleb Rivers, Pretty Little Liars. What's the female version of bros before hoes? Sisters before misters, right? Well, if you're Spencer Hastings, all that goes out the window. 2 of your sister's boyfriends? Check. Your best friend's ex? Check. Don't get me wrong, Spencer isn't the only one to blame, but I hate her character almost as much as I hate Alison because of how entitled she comes across, that I can't help but be super mad that this relationship ever came to be. Hannah and Caleb were by far the best and probably the most normal relationship on the show. So to have Caleb and Spencer of all people get together really irked me. It wasn't even like a casual relationship because this show is so overdramatic that both of them were in tears when they couldn't be together. On top of that, I was so over the show by that point that I was mad about the whole situation. At least as a saving grace, Hannah and Caleb rekindled their romance and got married in the end, so at least that's something. Okay, final one for this show. Arya Montgomery and Ezra Fitz, Pretty Little Liars. I'll move on from Pretty Little Liars in a minute, but there's no way I couldn't include the worst relationship idea in the history of the show. First of all, it's illegal. She's a minor and he's a teacher. Case closed, officer, arrest this man. But no. On top of that, when they hooked up initially, Arya was oblivious, but Ezra knew exactly who she was, that she was underage and still went ahead with it. But this wasn't his first offense. It was implied, or maybe confirmed, I forget, that Ezra hooked up with Alicent when she was 14 years old. What the fuck? And the reason Ezra got together with Arya in the first place was so he could get information out of her to write a book. What the actual fuck? Not only is that a series of crimes and completely screwed up, but the show actually romanticized this ridiculously nefarious relationship to the point that Arya and Ezra got married in the end. This is the worst relationship ever. Man, this show was seriously messed up. Rachel Green and Joey Tribbiani, friends. I was very nearly going to include Ross and Rachel on the list because that relationship just seemed entirely toxic. But I'm going to look at Joey and Rachel. I'm not going to lie, I have not seen Friends in the longest time, but I remember being like, huh? When Joey and Rachel got together? I skim-read an article about why Joey was better for Rachel than Ross, and I've got to say that it raised some excellent points. But for me, the reason why this relationship is bad is because of the situation, not the couple. If you were a group of close-knit friends, would you ever date your best friend's ex-wife who was also your best friend too? I don't know about you, but I sure as hell wouldn't. It just seems like a violation of all the friend codes going, and on top of that, wouldn't it be really, really weird? That to me would be like dating your sibling's ex. It's just wrong in my opinion. Commander Chakotay and 7 of 9, Voyager. Yeah, I have a question. What the hell was this relationship and where did it come from? First off, I love 7 of 9, she's the absolute best, and I also really like Chakotay. But seriously people, why were they thrown together suddenly? 7 had an episode where she tried dating and decided it wasn't for her, and she also had an episode where she had a relationship with a holographic version of Chakotay, where she discovered that her implants wouldn't allow her to experience happiness properly. But then now they're having a picnic and they get stranded on a planet together and they're an item? Who, with what, when, where, how? Okay, first of all, 7 is a freaking amazing character and she doesn't need to be shoehorned into a romance in the 11th hour. And if it was going to be anyone, it should have been the Doctor. Second of all, Chakotay's character was front-loaded with the whole Seska stuff in the first few seasons, and then they did absolutely nothing with him for the remainder of the show. So it felt to me like they got to the last season, realised that 7 didn't have a boyfriend, and they'd done nothing with Chakotay for years, so... profits? No. Just no. Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, Harry Potter. I was so glad that they didn't throw Harry and Hermione together because it seemed so obvious. But then they threw Ron and Hermione together, which was equally as obvious. I know they've all been through some shit, but why did any of them have to get together at all? I love the Harry Potter franchise, I really do, but the relationships in it were the most annoying part because honestly, I couldn't care about the love lives of some school kids when Alan Rickman is standing right there. Oh my god, I love him so much! I haven't read all the books, but from a movie standpoint, there was no build-up to Ron and Hermione's relationship, making that kiss in Deathly Hallows seem forced and awkward. Side note, I wasn't a fan of Ginny and Harry, but they didn't annoy me enough to warrant a separate entry on this list. Natasha Romanoff and Bruce Banner, Avengers Age of Ultron. When Black Widow and Hulk got together in Age of Ultron, I was like, huh? It made no sense to me because in the first movie, it wasn't hinted at or explored at all. And then by the next movie, the relationship was dropped, so what was the point in it exactly? Not every Marvel character needs to have a romantic interest, and after her whole love is for children speech to Loki in the first Avengers movie, the relationship came out left field. I don't find their relationship as irritating as the next two entries on this list, as they're not hormonal teenagers, but it seemed really redundant, especially as it disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Katniss Everdeen and Peter Malak, The Hunger Games. I read the books, I watched the movies, and both times I thought the relationship between these two was dumb. I hate love triangles, especially with teenagers, so the whole Team Peter, Team Gale thing bored the hell out of me. Right, where to begin? In a dystopian future where kids are forced to fight to the death, who is wanting to procreate? Anyway, the whole shtick of the Hunger Games is that Peter and Katniss are trying to sell a romantic storyline to win sponsors and survive the game. Right, cool, I'm so on board for that, because Peter actually likes Katniss and Katniss is cynical and grumpy about the whole thing. Great, fantastic. But wait, what's that? They're actually going to become a couple even though there's no chemistry and their personalities are totally not compatible? No, seriously, why do that? I mean, I know why, to pander to the tween audiences, but in reality, after the first 600 times Katniss saves Peter's life, she'd drop a crackerjack nest on his head and call it macaroni. Katniss could have been such a badass independent character, living this relationship idea to survive the game and being like, yeah, you know what dude, I'm not into you in that way and I just wanted to live. After all the shit she's been through, especially Rude dying, she would not be in the mood for hooking up with some dude whose only skill is cake decorating himself into the surroundings. But at least they're not as bad as Bella Swan and Edward Cullen, Twilight. I'm gonna take a breath before I dive into this shitstorm of a relationship. Edward Cullen was 87 years older than Bella, who was 17 when Twilight began. I never get why shows romanticize human vampire romances, especially when the human is an underage girl. As much as I love Buffy, Angel was 225 years older than her when they entered into a relationship, and Stefan was 163 years older than Elena in the beginning of Vampire Diaries. That isn't romantic, that's predatory. I don't care how young these people were when they were turned into vampires. They're still super old men in love with a teenage girl. Anyway, creeper vibes aside, Bella and Edward had zero chemistry, and I don't know if this is the fault with the writing or acting or what, but it was as romantic as a houseplant in love with a piece of cardboard. Edward was basically a stalker, and Bella was not only codependent, but she was also manipulative. They should never have gotten married, let alone had a creepy CGI baby that Jacob then imprinted on and fell in love with or something. Seriously, what the hell is the series? To make matters worse, Bella became a vampire, so now the two of them can be together for eternity. Please, can I throw some holy water on the pair of them and have done with it? The way Bella played Edward and Jacob against each other was inexcusable, and quite frankly makes her the villain of the Twilight Saga, not the protagonist. And there you have it. Those were, in my opinion, the worst on-screen couples that I could think of. Are there any that I mentioned that you actually ship? Or is there a couple I haven't mentioned that you can't stand? Let me know in the comments or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really means a lot. Or consider subscribing as I have lots more videos to come. I'll speak to you soon, and thanks for watching.